Yes, I'm Peter Roll, Peter Baekeland Roll, grandson of LHB, and his wonderful wife, Bonbon, whom we all adored, at the place that she bought at the behest of her son, George Baekeland. He had been fishing with Ernest Blanchard and said that this place was available for sale. And believe me, getting here in those days was by train to Racket Lake and then steamboat and all that. So she came up. I haven't calculated how old she must have been. Well, her son was in college, so let's say he was 19 or 20. So I suppose she was in her late 40s. She came up here and saw the place, bought it in 1922. Been in the family ever since, now in the 5th generation.
Yeah. They're here today.
We're here today, right?
You were, from Pomfret you went to Harvard?
Yes. I had been accepted at Dartmouth, but it was wartime. No car, no automobiles, rather isolated, and one of my closest friend at that time had changed his mind. He was a year ahead of me, Dana Bresnahan, gone to Exeter and was at Harvard, and I went to visit him one weekend in the winter, and in those days, hard to believe now, I applied for entrance to Harvard in late January of 1944 and was accepted in March.
Wow.
And at Pomfret, I stood about in the middle of my class in terms of grades, but that was okay. So I entered just before I was 17. In a very, very hot summer in Boston and Cambridge. Spent a year in the Navy from late June of 45 to early July of 46. Went back to college. Harvard gave us all us vets some credit for our military service. And so I was at Harvard, in fact, 3.5 years before graduating with my class on time. But that's, anyway, I have a lot of friends from that period. It was a wonderful time. Harvard is a great place then.
So you graduated Harvard?
I did.
And went to Columbia?
No. I had thought about going to graduate school in either Chicago or Wisconsin, but on a trip with my father to visit those places, over a beer in the evening, I said, I really don't want to associate myself with these people. The worst part of academia showed up in these two men who were heads of their respective departments at Chicago and Wisconsin, who were more interested in tearing down the work of colleagues in other institutions. And I just thought, what a small world they live in. So, and I know many people who were teachers who've confirmed that. I think it's a little easier today because professors have so many outside interests. And one man I know only through correspondence, who was head of the Russian department at Harvard until a few years ago, and he had to teach, according to his memoirs, had to teach only for 120 hours a year. So he had a lot of time to do research or to be consulting on the outside and so on. And for that matter, LHB, as I will call him, after he had finished his major work, did consulting for others, for other chemical companies, and was an adjunct professor at Columbia, when in fact it is, I suppose from his 60s on, he would say, when asked what his life work was or what he did, he would say, "Oh, I'm a professor of chemistry at Columbia University." He was very proud of that. And he was an adjunct professor, I believe. I'm not sure of that, but I don't think he was part of the regular faculty.
No.
What else?
The National Inventors Hall of Fame.
Oh, yes, all that came about very fortuitously through my friend Pat Lenihan. And Fortune magazine, year after year, has had an issue on inventors, appropriate to the nature of the magazine. This was done in collaboration with Junior Achievement, which is a great organization. Great organization. So Pat Lenihan was I'm not sure exactly what his title was then, but he got interested in my grandfather's work and said, he should be in the Fortune, be elected to I forget exactly what they called it, but it was all done through Junior Achievement. And I think Fortune picked the men. Not quite sure what the relationship was, but anyway, it was a dual project between the two organizations, between Fortune magazine and Junior Achievement. So it was Pat who got the ball rolling and proposed LHB for being included, and I forget what year it was. So indeed, that took place, and he was named and written up. And then, more logically, either the same year or the year before or the year after, he was inducted into the Patent Hall of Fame. And that was very, very well deserved.
Can you describe a bit of what his connection with the patent industry was, or?
No, only that, of course, with any patent, and it's true today, once a patent is published, others have a look at it, and there are lots of cheapskates and scoundrels in the world, and always will be. So they try and change the formula a little bit, or even copy it directly, and there were a lot of infringers. He had a very good patent lawyer whose name I did once know. But
Hayes?
What?
Was it Hayes?
Yes, exactly. And they, so I'm told, never lost a patent suit. And then my grandfather, being the man he was, brought a number of these people whom he defeated in the courts into his business as vice presidents and so on. So, but that was good. Anyway, I went to Dallas to receive the Junior Achievement Award, the first time I'd ever spoken in public, I might add. So, Mrs. Hobby was there, and I'm trying to think who the others were. But
Oh, your sister was there.
What?
Your sister was there.
No, she wasn't there.
Not that one.
No, she wasn't at the
Oh, the
Junior
patents,
Achievement.
right.
She wasn't at the Junior Achievement thing. So anyway, it was wonderful. The Dallas cheerleaders were waving their things around, and not those things, the other things they had in their hands.
Right.
So anyway, it came my turn to speak, and I was smart enough not to try and read anything. I had a little 6x4 card in which I'd made a couple of notes.
Yeah.
And spoke extemporaneously for, I don't know, a few minutes. There were 2,000 people in the stadium.
That's a
Yes,
big...
and they had a big, one of these big screens up in the middle where you can see from four sides, because it's a sports stadium.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was very nice. I met some wonderful people while I was there, and it's a great organization, Junior Achievement.
Yeah.
When Time did a one or two issues on people who had shaped the 20th century, LHB wound up in that, and I think among the inventors, he was number 5.
Yeah.
Anyway, all this, of course, is history. As a young boy, knowing my grandfather, these things weren't discussed. It was, what are we going to have for lunch? And grand-papa.
Yeah.
I think chicken fricassee, which we always had.
Did you ever try his wine or beer?
Probably just a touch of the wine, but all those grapes came from California, and they were not the good wine grapes were not durable enough to last a trip from California to the East Coast. So it was all pretty poor stuff.
And in those days, children were allowed to drink a little bit of wine?
With water.
Yeah.
Wine and mixed with water.
Yeah.
Well, it was a grand old place, so different from the home that I was born in and grew up in, with its porte cochere, greenhouses and big lawns. And
Servants?
yes, and the kitchen downstairs with a dumbwaiter to bring it up to the dining room level. And there were 2 old flintlock pistols hung from metal hooks by the large fireplace in the entrance hall, which of course were fascinating to a young boy. Then there was a gong, which we loved to go and whack by a little balcony that overlooked the dining room, and also a little small conservatory off the dining room. Everything in dark wood. A very, very handsome thing. The window panes were all single. I guess they were double hung windows, but with large panes, single pane instead of divided up with muttons and so on. Mm-hmm. Our whole family, brothers and sisters and mother, lived there one winter, right after my mother's divorce, until she found a place in Scarsdale. And we went to school by train. We were taken to the railway station in the morning.
In Yonkers?
No, not in Yonkers, in a little station just north of Yonkers called Greystone. And went to the Scarborough School with my oldest sister, Céline, and with a future stepsister, Catherine Wyman. So she was one of my sister's closest friends. They were the same age. Yeah. But it was a nice place. There was, as I'm sure has been noted, a sunken bathtub, which we're all mad for. A grand piano in the room to the right of the entrance. And then my grandmother's writing room, with her desk, a big portrait statue of my grandmother's son and daughter, my daughter being my mother. A broad porch running along the west side of the house overlooking a long, steep hill and the Hudson River. And then at the southwest corner of the house, a turret that had a spiral staircase, I think. I'm not sure about the staircase, but there was a staircase that went up where my grandfather had his little office. And it was, as one might expect, not some place that children were allowed to go.
How about the laboratory? Did you get into the laboratory at all?
Well, the laboratory was simply one of those places that had been cleaned up, and it was up by the greenhouses in the garage. And at the time that I was a young fellow, nothing was going on there. There were various flasks and Bunsen burners and all kinds of stuff, but we poked around it. We looked, we didn't touch, or if we did, it was very gently. It was simply a reminder of what had gone on years before.
How about the anchorage? Do you recall anything?
Oh yes, the anchorage, the place in Florida, was wonderful. I was there as a small youngster with my mother, probably 3 or 4 years old. In fact, I remember it only really through pictures at that time. Later on in the early 40s, while I was in prep school, I went there with my mother on those train rides from New York, which is overnight. Great way to travel, and where I also learned to play backgammon. It was a very nice, modest home on a lovely piece of property, 8 acres on the water, probably 3 times as long as it was wide, and a house built around a little atrium with a small fish pond, goldfish pond in the middle, tile floor, screen, keep out the bugs, bugs and birds and all. A very practical house of the Carline limestone that's typical in that part of Florida. A rather simple house, and a small upstairs. I think it was just 1 room. Then in the front, steps leading down to where the driveway came around in front of the house on the east side, and then a swimming pool. It was not a fancy pool, and there was no pool house or anything like that.
And apparently it was called the tank.
That I don't know, but, and then the lawn sweeping down and lots of trees on both sides and down the lower part of the lawn area. And then a little boat basin where he kept his motor yacht. Not a very big boat, maybe 50, 60 feet.
Flat bottom, apparently. He could go over the flats.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I do recall on one occasion sailing over to Matheson Key to have a picnic lunch.
Do you know anything about the Matheson family? Or?
Not really. I've met some of them both at that time and subsequently, but I don't know. More prominent in the life there was a very strong friendship with David Fairchild and his wife, was the daughter of Alexander Graham Bell, Marion.
Let's go on to Eastman Kodak and Velox. You were in photography for a while.
Yeah, I mean
What was the relationship between Eastman Kodak and Baekeland, do you think?
Well, I mean, these were just stories that we knew growing up, that once he had created this first, I think it was a silver chloride paper, which was a much faster paper, as they call it. That is to say, it took less light to expose the image. Eastman tried to block the sale of chemicals from the German chemical manufacturers to my grandfather, in which they failed. He had started the Nepra chemical company, or whatever it was, to make the paper with this new, more sensitive emulsion. And I have no idea what the dickering was and so on, but eventually made a deal with George Eastman to sell all of his rights to Eastman, and went on to develop what became Bakelite.
But he also, between that time and Bakelite, was he working for somewhere in Niagara Falls? Was that previous? That was previous.
I have a silver loving cup presented to him by the Hooker Chemical Company. That's dated 1911. for his work in chlorine chemistry.
Was that his first job in this
I have
country?
no idea.
Oh, Anthony. Anthony was the first job. Hooker was electrochemistry, I think. He was consulting with the Hooker Company.
Yes, well, as I say, I have this lovely cup, which was presented to him by the board in appreciation of what he had done to develop a better way of making chlorine, I believe. Still a basic ingredient in chemistry. But, you know, these are all things that I learned from other sources, not from him telling me or from my grandmother telling me.
No.
She never talked about the business.
What was her main interest?
Her grandchildren. Without question, her main interest was her grandchildren. And, of course, had been music. And according to Céline, my sister Céline, she had wanted to perform in public, and it's neither so uncommon then or even now for husbands to say, no, I do not want you on the stage. But she had a grand piano. She loved to play Chopin and Liszt, and did it with great verve and many missed notes. So,
Now, can you say a little bit more about Brooks? Did you learn more about his experience in the war, for instance? Did you talk about his war experiences?
well, he wrote about that. And since he was very good at math, he remained in Canada for a long time, and as an instructor, math then being required for navigation. Today, I don't think they even have compasses. Everybody uses GPS. But when the U.S. entered the war, those who were in the Canadian Air Force were left and joined the American Air Force. He was in the, I don't know if he was in the 8th Air Force or not, but even in England, I think that his primary duties were training.
No, he was at Columbia for...
That was after the war.
After the war, yeah.
No, he wrote a very good little short account of his reconnaissance, which wound up in a plane crash and hospitalization and so on in southern Germany. They were making a reconnaissance. The intended objective being Schweinfurt, and they didn't get there because he crashed, but survived with a few broken ribs and collarbone and concussion and loss of memory, which he recovered later on fully, in fact quite quickly.
You described getting to know Brooks a little more later on in life in the 60s.
Yeah, so we became very good friends from about 1960 on, and I don't know just what years he was living here and what years he was living in Europe, but when he was here I saw a lot of him, and very often here in the Adirondacks, in fact most often here in the Adirondacks. He hadn't been interested in it before, but he loved the woods, and so he kind of picked up hunting, which had been a avocation of mine for many years. And one year went out to the Canadian Rockies. He was in 60 or 61, I think 1960. We were very, very close friends and corresponded at least once a week from 1960 until he died last year in 2007.
Did he have any particular insights into his grandfather? Do you know?
No, he knew him obviously much better, being 6 years older, knew him much better than I did. And of course, our grandfather was perhaps more interested in him than in others because of his interest in science. One of the things, although it didn't particularly pertain to Brooks, but I believe it was in the diaries that he said that, way back in the late 30s or 1940 that biochemistry was the future, in which, of course, he was prescient. And, but yeah, Brooks could speak to him on a level more nearly that of an adult than I could, being 6 years younger. Mm-hmm. So, but Brooks and I had similar attitudes about many things, which kept our correspondence fresh all those years.
Did you keep letters from him?
What?
Did you keep letters from him?
Oh yeah, I have huge number of letters, and then once he started writing on the computer, I have not all, but probably 3/4 of those as well. So that's a lot of letters.
Yes.
And
Can you describe your mother a little bit?
my mother.
Nina Wyman.
Yes, I know. Ninette Baekeland Roll, later Wyman. Memory plays tricks on you, and I go into that a little bit later, but in retrospect, one of the things I learned from my mother, who was a very positive woman, was to say yes to life and not to say no. My father, although I wouldn't say he was the opposite, and there were many constraints not of his own making that made his life more difficult, but he was definitely not that way. My mother was adventurous. So, in fact, she left Vassar to take a job in Washington as a yeomanette in World War I, sort of the equivalent of the whack or a wave in World War II, although it was strictly working in an office. I don't know whether she took dictation or did typing or whatever. She never talked much about it. But
what about your Uncle George? Do you have any memory of him?
George Baekeland, and he was always Uncle George, to the end of his life, which was 1966, took a particular interest in me, and more than his own children, certainly. In fact, he even dedicated a book that he wrote on shotguns to me. And I visited him and his youngest son, Fred, who's a year younger than I am, over in Connecticut after he moved there after his divorce, which I think was in 1934 or 35. So it was my interest in shooting that particularly appealed to him, because neither of his two sons cared one bit about that, and there wasn't a great deal of fondness between either of those boys and their father. George Baekeland, I don't know, I suppose my sister Céline, again, the age difference there, that she would have understood or known him better. But I think we all understood him. He's a very, very talented person, often with great personal charm, but with I won't call it, kind of bordering on contempt for things that he didn't like or agree with. And yet he had a wide circle. He had a wide circle of friends, and he taught us, as my sister often said, well, you know, he taught us sailing and all those things. So he did participate in our life, and I don't know. I would really have to ask Fred, now that Brooks is gone, or Dickie, to know more about their father. He was always very, very, very kind to me, and he really would have preferred to have been born in the Victorian era, and of course, and very early became a Anglophile. But I enjoyed my time with him, and his second wife, Grace, and I got along wonderfully. I visited them at their home in Connecticut many times, and
See if there's anybody I'm missing.
but he, I think, had not too much interest in business, so
Bakeland expected him to take over the business at some point?
well, yes, but I think that his father, LHB, understood that two things. One, that there was more competition coming into the business, and two, that his son really didn't want to spend his life doing that. George Baekeland was also had a lot of talent using his hands, and he was quite a decent etcher. I have one of his etchings that he did in the Casbah. I don't know whether from pictures or from real life, but he had been over there. And he had a very neat little workshop. He built a beautiful sailboat, which was number 0, if I may put it that way, of the Lightning class. He was a great friend of Rod Stevens, of Sparkman and Stevens, yacht designers. And so I say he had many talents. He just wasn't much interested in business, and of course he had money, which makes life easier. Later on in his life, in the 60s, early 60s, I shared an office with him in New York. And then later Brooks, at one of those times when he was living in New York, also came in and shared that office with me. So anyway, as I say, I had a wonderful rapport with him, and anyway, he died in his early 70s, 72 or 3, something like that, in 1966. Linda and I were in the Caribbean at the time, so I didn't go to his memorial service. But and then later, Martha Stewart bought his house, which she only recently sold. But all the people who served in the LHB and Bonbon's house, basically for their whole lives, were all given trusts, and the trusts originally being in Bakelite stock, and then later when it was sold, Union Carbide stock, and managed. These were not huge trusts, but they were such that they had a comfortable retirement, and that included the chauffeur, the 2 gardeners, his secretary. I don't know whether there were others. Cooks came and went, as cooks still do in restaurants. So, but these other people all were given, trusts were made for them so that they could have a comfortable retirement.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
What about the trust? He set up trusts for the grandchildren as well.
Yes, but particularly for the Roll children because of my mother's divorce. And how would my mother remarry, which she did 3 years later, but they were all set up at the time of my mother's divorce in 1933 for the Roll children. But the Baekeland children, his son's children, essentially had to wait until he died before they came into their inheritance.
Can you say a little bit about your father?
Oh, yes. Well, my father grew up in Ellsworth, Minnesota. He was one of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, Catholic family from southern Germany. I presume that had come over in the mid-1800s when so many people left Germany. But my father, having gone to Marquette in Wisconsin for a year, then transferred to the Colorado School of Mines, which is where he became best friends with George Baekeland, who was also at the Colorado School of Mines, having initially been at Cornell. So both of them had transferred after, I guess, 1 year. I'm not sure for George Baekeland whether it was more than 1 year or not. But and they also both became pilots in World War I, although my father did not see active duty. The war ended. When the war ended, he was still in Texas at Kelly Field.
Just to move on a little, did Rowley, your father, George Roll, did he ever talk about Baekeland and the Bakelite Corporation with you?
Oh yeah, he talked about it endlessly. But
what was your impression of his employment with the Bakelite Corporation?
he was a mining engineer, and then his wife's family, LHB and Bonbon, wanted the children all to be closer to them. And so he was asked to quit the mining business and came and became, I don't know whether right away or after some apprenticeship, became the treasurer of the company. And that suited him very well. He was well suited to detail work and thoroughly honest, but he also recognized that he could never overcome the fact that his great friend, George Baekeland, was the son of the man who started the company, and therefore he would not ever be the head of the company. I don't know whether he had ambitions to be head of the company or anything, but there was a certain amount of friction there. And I think this shows up in the diaries. And you know, I don't know whether my father was more stubborn than most men, but whatever the dynamics were, he quit the company, and I forget just when he quit. But it certainly was not it was not a good thing for him. And in fact, as I was talking before about my mother being a yes person, my father never really looked forward to life after that. All his stories, all his conversation about such things was all about the past, the Bakelite days, and not about things that he might be doing and so on. And he had a lot of opportunity ahead of him. Of course, he went with World War II. He went to work back in the mining business, but working for the government, allocating scarce minerals. Well, all minerals were considered scarce virtually, except for rock.
Another question, have you been to Belgium?
Been where?
Belgium. Ghent.
No, I've never been there. I've been to Holland and many times to France and Italy and Spain, but I've never been to Belgium. So,
And do you have any, besides the cup from Bakeland, he gave you you said he gave you a silver cup?
no, he didn't give me a silver cup.
That was given to him.
Oh, I have that.
Yeah. Any other memorabilia from Leo or Bombo?
No, I had one nice piece of plastic which I gave my daughter Céline. Which was a Bakelite elephant, and but I don't have any memorabilia. I do have a few glass plates, photographs that he took. I have another photograph taken at Snug Rock in a chain-driven open automobile. Do you know the picture, Hugh?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. With Bobo and my mother,
yeah.
with bonnets tied under the chin.
Yeah. How do you feel that the family, basically the descendants feel about their great patriarch? Is there any enthusiasm in the...
I can't speak for the others.
No. But I would say your son Walter is interested in
Not particularly. Céline is more interested in the family heritage, if you want to call it that, than anyone else. My brother was certainly not moved by that at all. Push, my sister was, to quite an extent, especially, of course, our place here in the Adirondacks. But no, and I don't. It's just you're either interested or you're not interested, and I have not ever kind of followed up the the stages of development of organic chemistry, and particularly in the areas where he went. I was pretty good at Newtonian physics, and took a course in chemistry, but I forget whether it was school or college. School, I think. But it's not something that I spend much time at. I'm not a collector by nature, and I would enjoy reading about some of these things, and I have, of course, both my sister Céline and I were the only two family members. None of George Baekeland's children contributed a bit to the work that Karl Kaufman did many years ago when he wrote his book on the wizard. What was the book called?
Grand Duke, Wizard, and yes. Bohemian.
Yes, exactly. Very good title.
To describe your grandfather?
Well, as I say, Hugh, I didn't know him well enough to say whether that describes him or not.
But to Karl,
he was a very independent, even-tempered man. I never saw anything to say otherwise than that he was a very well-balanced person who, at the time I knew him, was enjoying the comforts that he had created for himself. Now, here is Charles Edward Baekeland visiting us at this time, named after his great-grandfather's father. So I remember Brooks saying to when I heard that they named him Charles Edward, and I said, "Oh, after his great-grandfather." He says, No, not at all. I just picked out the name. You know, Brooks was just kidding me, but
Yeah.
I knew from Carl's book what Grandpapa's father's name was.
Carl Baekeland. I think in Belgium they pronounce Charles Karl. K-A-R-A-E-L. Karl is Charles in Flemish.
So, and as I'm sure you know, it was my grandfather's mother who, as is so often the case, who encouraged her son in his academic development rather than his father, who certainly looked loutish. And anyway, so that's, and all these people were honest and, you know, so as far as I could see, straightforward. Wow, there are so many people who grow up in divisive families, and ours has not been. I mean, Brooks himself basically separated himself from his sister and his brother, which I consider too bad and a mistake on his part, through his own, oh, I don't know what, bad temper, whatever. I don't know whether he invented a standard of his own, but he didn't allow for people's mistakes. So,
Well, wasn't Baekeland considered a bit of, what's the word, imperious? He was,
oh, I don't think so. Not by the standards of his time.
no.
No, I don't think so at all.
But his relationship
In
with
fact,
Bonbon,
what?
oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I think if you read correspondence of people like that, I mean, things were all much more formal in those days and in every way. So,
But I guess he came across to some people as imperious because he was so knowledgeable and genius, the mind of a genius that he had.
but I don't know where you run into that. Whether it was something I read or something that Puss told me, that he and Thomas Edison, I don't know how much contact they had. They had some, but I don't think they liked each other. This happens throughout life in many circumstances. I don't know whether that was rivalry or what, but some very bright people tend to be rather impatient, especially when they're young. They often grow out of that impatience. But no, I don't. As I say, it would have to show up in correspondence or something of that kind for me to say that he was imperious. I certainly never saw anything but kindness. And for instance, for his friend Fairchild, who was younger, not a lot younger, but somewhat younger, you know, very, very close relationship. Two men, both very successful in their field, enjoying each other's company. Yes, he was not a social person, but I don't, as far as imperious is.
Hence the Bohemian.
What?
Hence the Bohemian side, possibly.
Well, the Bohemian side came from his clearly evident disregard for fancy clothes and things like that. I would hardly call it Bohemian.
No.
He was not the penniless artist of La Boheme.
Right.
So Bohemian, I would say, is not the right word.
No.
But anyway, that's.
I think we're
Done.
Wound it up. Yes.
Good, thank
We're
you.
running out of juice on the battery.
Okay, all right.
Thank you so much,
You're
Peter.
very welcome.